check marks, and we will get continuing on the biomes unit 1.1. We'll see how we do. Hopefully we can finish off the biome stuff today, and next day we'll jump into 1.2, which is on ecosystems. Today's stuff gets a little bit dry, and but it's kind of worthwhile to kind of go through all of the different biomes and talk a little bit about their differences and things like that. So we'll do that. Just wait for a couple more check marks from Jenica and Jeremy and Eric, and then we'll continue on from where we left off. I've received about half of the climatographs that I was expecting to get in. So if you still have yet to submit that climatograph, the first assignment, that was due on Monday. Today is Thursday. Thanks for the check marks, guys. A couple other housekeeping things. Badminton tomorrow from 1 to 2:30, and that is on Richter Street, the badminton club. You don't need any experience, you just got to show up and put on some clean, dry shoes with non-marking soles, and we have all sorts of skill levels there, new, experienced. Play some badminton, it's good fun. Next week, we obviously don't have class on Monday. That's a family day holiday. We will have class on Tuesday and Wednesday. I put the new schedule up yesterday. And then on Thursday next week, we have Experience OC, where I believe all of you guys have signed up for particular different things at Okanagan College to kind of just go through and check out the programs they offer and some of the things that they do. And even if you're not interested in Okanagan College as kind of a destination once you're finished school, it's very interesting to go there just to see what types of programs are offered and just sort of, you know, the types of jobs and things that these programs lead to. I went last year with our grade 10s. It was an amazing day. Everyone took something out of it. You have free lunch, so it's definitely worth it. And for some of you guys who are newer to the program, I hope Mrs. Wood has contacted you about it to kind of try to get you in a session that you might be interested in. So if you have yet to sign up for a session or you don't remember, Mrs. Wood will be the contact on that. So just fire her an email or a message in Moodle and just mention that Mr. Borden was talking about Experience OC and you haven't signed up for anything. But you should have received an email by now. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Nada. Zip, zero, zilch. Okay. We are kind of working our way through the first unit, the biomes section. I'm just going to grab a little look at the learning guide for this first unit here. So the learning guide starts at the top with instructions, complete all of the stuff. So the notes we go through in class, again, they match up with the learning guide here, and you should be able to kind of, as we go through the presentation in class, or as I go through it, you should be able to jot down the notes and kind of fill in the blanks as we go through this. So factors that influence the biomes, the graph that we looked at. We talked about this instant practice last day, looking at that chart, determining which biome I was referring to based on the precipitation and temperature values. We talked about the factors a little bit more in depth, so latitude, elevation, ocean currents. We did some stuff on climatographs. And then we talked just briefly about adaptations last day, so structural, physiological, and behavioral. So structural would be something on the body of the organism, whether it's a plant or animal. Physiological, a little trickier to kind of define, but generally speaking, there's some sort of chemical or chemical process. And behavioral is something an organism does. So, you know, plants face the sun all day, and that helps them, you know, increase the photosynthesis, things like that. So today we are going to look at the biomes specifically. So we're going to look at all 8 a little bit more in depth. And you can see that there's a breakdown there. The map here is a little bit different than the one that we use in the course. but you get the idea. You'll see a couple of different biomes like savanna and chaparral, and this map includes different biomes or additional biomes than the ones that we talk about in class. So what we are going to do today is we're going to go through each biome by biome, and talk about where they are, their climate. We're going to look at plant and animal adaptations in the biome, and it is a bit long and boring and dry, and I apologize, but just kind of the way she goes. So we are starting today on page 9 of the learning guide, and this is going to finish up section 1.1 of the learning guide, and then the second section, 1.2 ecosystems, we'll get to on Tuesday. So I'm going to just jump back into my slideshow here. See if I can find the right place to start. Let's try here. There we go. So the first biome we're going to look at is the tundra. And the tundra is, as you can see in the climatograph, it's quite dry. They don't receive a lot of rainfall if you're in a tundra location. You can see only about 20 to 30 millimeters per month. So that's 3 centimeters of rain in a month. That's definitely not a lot. The temperature is quite varied. Although it's quite cold most of the time, in the summer it does get above 0. So we can see that this is -5 and this is 5. So halfway in here, this is 0. So only for a little bit of the year is the temperature actually above 0 degrees. So when we start talking about plant and animal adaptations, then you can see why. Jesse, I just saw your question in chat, sorry. Yeah, you should have finished the first 8 pages before this. That's kind of the idea with how we do things. So each slide corresponds to a page in your notes. So this slide has a lot of words on it, but it matches exactly whatever page I just said. I think I said page 8 or 9. Page 9. Is anybody else confused by how the slides match the notes? Maybe I should have been more clear when I first started discussing it. A few slides aren't there. In terms of some of the blanks there, I do my best, yeah, Eric, I do my best to try to match them up as closely as possible. Sometimes there'll be, diagrams and things that aren't necessarily exactly the same, but generally speaking, about 95% of the learning guide can be just copied right off of the notes that I go through in class, I would estimate. So there are a couple blanks on your learning guide that kind of correspond. Tundra biome is always frozen. We call it permafrost. It's quite flat, very little drainage because the ground is frozen. How do you do the rest of them? How about we go through this stuff, Eric, and then we'll jump back in and look at some of the stuff we didn't cover, and then we can discuss how to fill that in. Does that work for you? So in the winter and the majority of the year, well, not the majority, about half the year, it's just constantly dark in the tundra. In the winter, the sun doesn't even rise. And then in the summer, they receive 24 hours of daylight. The sun never sets for a few weeks in the middle of summer because of the elevation. Plant adaptations. There's no trees in the tundra because the growing season's too short. It's just too cold all the time for anything to really grow. The ground's frozen, so roots can't penetrate the ground. And the majority of plants that grow in the tundra grow very, very close to the ground because that's where the heat is. As soon as you start growing high above the ground, it gets really cold and windy. kind of reading through here. Animal adaptations. Surprisingly, there's lots of animals that live in the tundra, and there's lots of plants as well, even though the soil isn't super fertile. Arctic foxes live there. They have specific adaptations, very short legs to reduce heat loss. There's caribou that lives there. There are caribou that actually kind of migrate through the tundra. They live there in the summer and then kind of leave it in the winter because it's too cold. And you can see other animals like snowy owl, and there's a butterfly that lives there. So if you've ever seen images of people in the tundra in the summer, the amount of bugs are incredible. Literally, you can die from exposure if you don't have your skin all covered up from getting bit from like flies and mosquitoes. They can literally suck all of the blood out of you, and it sounds kind of weird, but there's that many bugs there. So in the summer, all those bugs hatch, the birds kind of flock there and eat all that food because birds can migrate, obviously travel great distances. So that's tundra. The next one, the boreal forest. So when we look at the map of the boreal forest, it borders the tundra, so it's right next to the tundra. So you'd expect the climate to be kind of similar to the tundra, and it is similar. There's a very large temperature variation. So in the winter, I keep on grabbing this mouse, but it's not connected to this computer. In the winter, we're looking at temperatures in the -20 range. And then in the summer, we're getting up to about +20. So that's a 40-degree temperature swing from the coldest to the warmest month. And then the rainfall, whereas the tundra was in this kind of 20 to 30 millimeter month range, you'll notice the boreal forest, the summer months, actually receive a little bit more rainfall, even up to about 80 millimeters or 8 centimeters of rainfall. Now, technically speaking, we live in the boreal forest, but our climate's a little bit drier than that of a traditional boreal forest. So I guess I should mention, when you guys get into quizzes and tests in regards to these biomes, it's not extremely important that you've memorized specific facts about the biome. For instance, like let's look at this. The location of the boreal forest is from 55 degrees to 65 degrees north latitude. You don't need to memorize that fact, but you should be able to identify the differences between biomes. What makes a boreal forest unique from the tundra? Why is a boreal forest different than a desert? You should be able to compare them and figure out what makes them unique. So that's kind of the important thing about the biomes, is just knowing the differences between them and how to compare them and why they're unique and what animals that live there are unique. So memorizing things like, oh, the temperature range is from 0 to -40 or 30 to 85 millimeters of rain. That's not important that you memorize those facts, but you should be able to either look at a climatograph and kind of recognize that that's probably the boreal forest because of how much rain and its temperature variations, or you should be able to look at something like a map, and this map right here is actually in your data booklet, so you can look at where all the biomes are. But you should be able to compare them and sort of identify differences between them. That's the important thing. So we live in the boreal forest. We get snow in the winter, we get rain in the summer, we have 4 seasons. Not all biomes have 4 seasons. And we have a summer growing season. In the Okanagan, we're not a great example of a boreal forest because our growing season in the summer is quite long. But typical boreal forest, thinking like northern BC, has a growing season about a month and a half, 2 months, 50 days. Rough terrain, lots of marshes and lakes, and the soil's very wet. Plants. Trees are mainly coniferous, meaning they have cones, so these are the pine trees, spruce trees. Waxy needles allows the snow to fall off, because if the snow didn't fall off, branches would break. And that's kind of some of the plant adaptations. The last one is the animal adaptations. We have lots of animals in the boreal forest, insect-eating birds, seed-eating birds. Animals have large bodies like moose and elk. Fur of the snowshoe hare can change color from winter to summer depending on what is going on around it. It's snowy, it's white. In the summer it turns brown. And reptiles and amphibians are rare because they can't survive the low temperatures. So there's not a lot of reptiles that live here. A few frogs and turtles and things like that. But generally speaking, the winter's too cold. So that's boreal forest. Anyone have any questions on the boreal forest? All right. Temperate deciduous forest. Does anybody know what the word deciduous means in terms of plants? If I said that tree is deciduous. Nobody's ever heard the word deciduous before? Boreal forest and deciduous forests are quite similar in terms of plants and animals, except for one really big difference. They are very close together, Jenica, for sure they are. Deciduous doesn't necessarily mean the plants grow closely together. Nobody knows what deciduous means. There's always somebody that knows what deciduous means. Yeah, for sure, Madison. Physical features. Deciduous. Deciduous means plants that lose their leaves in the winter. So when we talk about a deciduous forest, we're talking about the types of plants that will, turn yellow, orange, and then drop their leaves. That's what deciduous means to us. So if you think about deciduous forests, we have some deciduous type trees in the Okanagan. Generally in neighborhoods and things like that, they're not necessarily native to this area. If you were to go into the forest around Kelowna, you'd see lots of pine trees. You'd see some birch and some aspen, things like that, but mainly pine trees and spruce trees. If you were to go in the forest, let's say in like Ontario, you would see many, many more trees, kind of like maple trees and really big trees with large leaves that fall in the winter. Does anyone know why trees lose their leaves in the winter other than it gets cold? What's the advantage to a tree to lose its leaves in the winter as opposed to, say, like a spruce or a pine tree? In the winter, these are the physical features of the boreal forest. Plants have waxy needles. The snow slides off the needles in the winter. What about deciduous trees? What would be the benefit for a tree to lose its leaves, especially in the winter? How about this? Has anybody ever watched the news in the spring or fall when we either get a very late snowstorm in the spring or a very early snowstorm in the fall before the trees have lost all their leaves, or just after the trees have gained all their leaves? What happens to the trees when you get a bunch of snow when the leaves are still on the trees? They fall. The branches break. If you have leaves on trees and you get a ton of snowfall, it's just too much weight to support and the branches will just snap and break off the trees. So in the winter, when you get big snowstorms and snowfalls and things like that, you don't generally hear of, power being out because a branch fell on a power line or things like that. But in the fall and spring, you hear about it way more often because those branches are full of leaves. The leaves get snow on them and then they just snap off because it's too cold. Madison, hopefully you're all right there. So looking at the map, we have eastern Canada, eastern United States. kind of southern Ontario, not so much into Quebec, not so far into Newfoundland, Labrador, but Europe, and then a little bit in the east coast of China and Russia, this portion over here, and Japan also has the deciduous forest. The rainfall is even higher than the boreal forest, more consistent rainfall throughout the year, and mainly snow in the winter because the temperature is colder. So this is about 0 here. So you have about half the year that has nice warm temperatures, and then half the year that's quite cold. So this would be a climatograph for Chirana. Anybody in our class from the East Coast? Anybody live in Ontario, Southern Ontario? No Ontario people. All right, I've never lived there, just visited. Okay, so we kind of know where these places are. The climate, you have rainfall from 75 to 180 centimeters. So we're talking a lot more rainfall than something like the boreal forest. It's quite consistent rainfall throughout the year. You get seasonal changes. So again, we have 4 seasons in this biome. Very warm, long growing season in the summer. Cold winters. Soil is generally very good for plants because of the leaves. They fall and then they break down and introduce a bunch of nutrients to the soil. And the plants grow in layers. So you have your forest floor, and then you have, your mid layers, and then kind of growing up all the way to the top to the canopy trees. The light is able to get through those leafy trees down to the ground, as opposed to something like a tropical rainforest where no light hits the ground. There's very little growth on the ground. Lots of mosses. And the definition of deciduous is the deciduous trees shed their leaves in the winter, which prevents water loss and breakage. And then thick bark limits moisture loss in the summer when it gets nice and warm. So that's your deciduous forest in a nutshell. Jenica, at the end of class, I'm just going to discuss the Create a Creature assignment again that I kind of introduced last day. And I would like you guys to finish that for next Thursday. So I'll give you guys a week to do that. Does that work for you? All right. Take care. We'll see you when we see you. Animal adaptations. Lots of squirrels, rabbits, skunks, cougars, deer, wolves, bears, amphibians. A lot of animals store seeds because deciduous trees tend to have seeds, and some mammals hibernate. Many birds migrate to warmer areas because it's very cold in the winter. So that is your deciduous forest. The animals in a boreal forest and deciduous forest are quite similar. So finding an animal that's unique to one or the other can get a bit tricky. There are some that are unique, but even in the boreal forest, we have squirrels, rabbits, skunks, cougars, deer, wolves. We have all of these things. So that is the the deciduous forest in a nutshell. Plant adaptation. So we can go back. Madison, we're not like copying this all down, right? We're just filling in the blanks. I hope you're not trying to copy that all down. Okay, just want to make sure. Didn't want you to be feverishly getting a hand cramp there. Trying to get all this stuff in there. Super. All right, so animals. Again, very similar to the boreal forest. Trying to think of an animal that's unique to the deciduous forest that wouldn't live in the boreal forest. But I'm having a tough time doing that. Possibly some bird species, but even then the birds migrate, so I don't know if I can come up with anything there. Temperate rainforest. This is a very specialized, unique biome. And temperate in this sort of context means that the temperature is quite consistent. So if we look at the red dots for the temperature here, you see there aren't really huge swings in temperature. We have everything between about 5 degrees and 15 degrees year-round. Now there are obviously exceptions to this, but as averages, the temperature doesn't have big swings. Whereas the boreal forest and the deciduous forest, you can have temperature swings of 40 to 60 degrees depending on the season. When we talk about the temperate rainforest, you're very, very consistent in terms of temperature. And if we look at the amount of rainfall, when we were talking about the tundra, this was the rainfall we were getting for tundra, right down in the like 80 millimeters. Now we're up to 10 centimeters, or sorry, 100 millimeters, 10 centimeters, 20, 30, 40. So we're talking about 40 centimeters of rainfall in a month. That's incredibly large amounts of rainfall. And then even in the middle of summer, they receive very little rainfall in comparison, but it's still 10 centimeters of rain. That is a lot of rain. So this is Pachina Point. I've actually been to Pachina Point before. It's on Vancouver Island. And you can see on the map that we have the west coast of North America. We have the west coast of Chile, down in the very southern part of South America. Then we have way over here, my mouse won't go that far, we have southern Australia, Tasmania, and New Zealand. So the reason these biomes exist is because they're next to an ocean and there's a warm onshore ocean current there. So we get hit with the jet stream. All right, so we have a pretty good idea of where they are. 200 centimeters a year of rainfall. Imagine 2 meter sticks. That's about as tall as I am. I think I'm 1.9 meters tall. So more rainfall than I am tall in a year. It's incredibly large amounts of rainfall. The temperature is quite consistent. Very rarely will it get below zero, always in that 5 to 20 degree range. It says 25. And a lot of the moisture that the rainforest receives isn't in the form of rain, it's in the form of fog. So if you've ever stayed near the ocean or been to the ocean, kind of in the west coast of North America, kind of from like Oregon up through to Prince Rupert, you find that every morning you'll wake up, no matter if it's a sunny or cloudy day, and there'll just be a really thick fog. All of that water condenses at night, forms the fog, and then the day it gets warm again and it kind of evaporates, and then it condenses again at night. And that fog blows onshore, and that's where you get your water from. Also, large mountain ranges on the back of the forest. So BC, we have the Coast Mountains. Down in South America, you have Chile has the Andes, and I'm not sure of the ranges in New Zealand. I don't know what they're called. Not quite as a large of a mountain range down in New Zealand. So as the moisture gets blown onshore, it hits the mountains, drops all the moisture, and then the clouds move on with less rainfall than when they hit. Trees can grow very tall. So some of the tallest trees in the world are found in these temperate rainforests. Mosses live on trees because of all the moisture in the air, Most animals live on or near the forest floor because it's so rainy. They're protected down there. Lots of birds, small mammals, lots of insects. Very, very rich soil, all that moisture, all those plants. There you go. So that is your temperate rainforest in a nutshell. Anybody have any questions about temperate rainforest? Has anybody ever been to, well, I guess most of Vancouver Island, has anybody ever been to like the Tofino area of Vancouver Island? Or the Queen Charlotte's maybe? Those are really, really good examples of temperate rainforests. Just one person, hey? You guys got to get out and see your own province. There's a place on the west coast of Vancouver Island called the West Coast Trail. It's about a 100-kilometer trail from Port Renfrew to Pachina Point. A few years ago, I hiked it in the summer with some friends. It's pretty amazing to see the trees and the wildlife and the ocean. Just be walking along the beach and there's whales just playing off the coast, and ran into some bears. And Vancouver Island actually has the densest cougar population in BC. Lots of cougars. Pretty amazing views and sights and things to see. If you ever get an opportunity, highly recommend it. Grasslands. Now, I know I'm a teacher and I'm not supposed to, play favorites, but grassland is the worst biome ever. It's just so boring. Is anybody from Alberta here? Like, we're talking, yeah, Calgary. Calgary's kind of nice because it's right next to the Rockies, so if you really want to go to the mountains, you can just, take a trip out of Calgary and go into the Rockies, into like the mountains. Red deer. Now we're getting into some flat Alberta. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, kind of down into the United States. We're talking about the breadbasket of North America, where all of these grains and things are grown. You get large amounts of important stuff from the grasslands, but if you've ever driven across Canada, you get in your car and you leave BC and you're driving through the mountains, spectacular, huge peaks, snow covered in the summer, amazing scenery, beautiful lakes, and then you get, down the hill into Calgary, and then from Calgary on till Ontario, it's just like flat, rolling hills. It's got to be the most boring place. I know Mr. Ross, who's next to me here, he's a Saskatchewaner, and it has its own unique beauty, the northern Saskatchewan, the forests and all that. I get it, but boy, is it boring. So grasslands, they're a transition biome. So if you get a little bit more rainfall, you turn into a deciduous forest or the boreal forest. A little less rainfall, you're a desert. So it's a transition between nothing and very lush environments. The temperature range is very large. You can see we're going from about -10 up to about 20 degrees, so we have a large temperature swing. Rainfall is fairly consistent year-round in the 20 to 50 millimeters of rain, so pretty consistent rainfall. They get really cold and windy. Josh, if you were from Red Deer, you probably are well aware of what the cold winters look like there. Even Calgary gets pretty cold. Josh, do you get Chinooks in Red Deer like Calgary does? Or is the winter just always cold and long? Do you get like warm, super warm days in the winter? Calgary's lucky every once in a while. Cold straight through. Calgary's has something really unique that happens. We'll talk about it actually a little bit later in the biology unit, but it's called a Chinook, where really warm, moist air comes off the coast, and then it goes over the mountains and drops all of its rain, and then it's just really this huge, warm mass of air that kind of goes down over the prairies. And it'll be like -20, -30 in the middle of winter, and then all of a sudden you'll hit a Chinook, and it'll be like 10 degrees. And it's kind of I guess a nice break from the cold temperatures. Happens from time to time in the prairies or Calgary area. They're called steppes in Russia instead of grasslands. Chaparral is kind of like a grassland as well. There's lots of different names. Tropical savanna, tropical grasslands. This grasslands biome can be broken down further to more specific things, but we'll just call it grasslands and we'll put them all together. Rainfall is pretty consistent. Hot summers, cold winters. Mainly flat. Soil's rich and fertile. This is where we grow all of our food, our crops. So if you're eating a bowl of cereal or a granola bar, there's a good chance the grains that are in that cereal or granola bar came from somewhere in the United States, kind of the Dakotas, and in through Saskatchewan, Manitoba, even Alberta. Grasses grow very deep roots and have very bendable stalks because it's so windy. If they weren't bendable, the wind would blow and the grass would just break off. So grass is quite flexible. Strong winds can cause soil erosion. Usually get precipitation in spring and summer, and then fairly dry. Grass fires are common in the summer when it gets so hot. You get a lightning strike, starts the grass on fire. But we'll learn later that fire cycle is really good. It introduces nutrients back into the soil. So it's an important part of the grasslands ecosystem. So that's grasslands in a nutshell. Very important biome, but fairly boring. I shouldn't say that. Maybe one day I'll go to like Africa and go on a safari into the grasslands and see all these amazing animals, and I'll change my mind about how great grasslands are. But I'm not sold on grasslands yet, and you're not going to convince me otherwise. Plants. Trees are scarce, not enough rainfall. It talks about some specific types of grass here that obviously you won't have to memorize, but the important thing is to remember that not enough rainfall for trees to grow, and the grasses have to be able to bend in the wind, else they'd snap off and break and die. Roots are very deep. The animal variety in the grasslands is very impressive. So this is where your large grazing mammals are present. Antelope, kind of giraffes, elephants, leopards, cheetahs, lions, they like the grasslands. Wild horses, kangaroos, wolves, coyotes live there as well. Lots of animals, mice, rodents, gophers, snakes. And a lot of the rodents will bury to stay cool in the summer and to escape fire. Predators have nice little holes to live in. I was reading an article not long ago, and it said the most important species of animal in all of North America was the prairie dog, because they dig lots of burrows and they allow nutrients to get back into the soil. It's pretty weird that was such an important animal for North America, but who knew? These little prairie dogs, quite important. All right, any questions about the grasslands? This talks about temperate grasslands and tropical grasslands and everything else, but we just call them the grasslands. All right, guys, we're about halfway. Sure you're ready to be all the way. Tropical rainforest. This is one of my favorite biomes. I like me a good tropical rainforest. You can see that the temperature in a tropical rainforest is almost doesn't change. It's the same year round. That's because the tropical rainforests are always found in the tropics, and the sun is always directly overhead, so you don't get seasons. If you cut down a tree in the tropical rainforest, the tree won't have rings like it does in North America, the boreal forest, because there's no seasons. The rings in trees come from a long growing season in the summer and then no growth in the winter. That's when you get the ring. So each year you get a lot of growth in the summer, a little growth. But in the rainforest, you just get growth all year round, and trees cut down in the rainforest don't have any rings in them. Rainfall. We're talking massive amounts of rainfall. We're talking 30 centimeters a month. Pretty consistent. Even in the not rainy season, we're still talking 12 centimeters of rain a month. So very lush, lots of plants and animals. I think Jenna said she'd been to Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a great example of a tropical rainforest. Costa Rica is a tiny little country down on the little kind of joining thing between North and South America here. Costa Rica makes up about 1.5% of the world's landmass, and it has over 15% of the world's biodiversity. So that means that this tiny little land mass has more plants and animals than anywhere else. Pretty amazing. So these are the areas that are close to the equator. We're talking over 2.5 meters of rainfall a year. Crazy amounts of rain. Temperature is extremely consistent, 20 to 25 degrees Celsius year-round. That's why we like to go there and vacation. It's so nice and sunny all the time when it's not raining. Something that might be surprising to a lot of you is that the soil isn't very good to grow things. There's very few nutrients in the soil because it just rains so much, and there's so many plants growing that the nutrients are just pulled out of the soil so quickly. So then you get very limited plant growth on the forest floor because the soil is not great for growing. You got to get up into the trees. So there's lots of vines, lots of plants that live off of other plants, like parasitic plants that grow in trees, like orchids, things like that. They get rainfall all the time, so it doesn't matter if you're on the ground to collect rain. You can be up in a tree and lots of rain will come through. And leaves have the kind of narrow tips. You probably have a tropical plant possibly in your house. These narrow tips that allow the rainfall to just run right off them so they don't collect the rainfall. Some types of plants in the rainforest do collect rainfall. Very large varieties of plants. Lots and lots of different types of plants because of all that rainfall. And then we need to talk about the animals. Greatest diversity of animals on Earth, but very few large mammals. So we don't have big elephants and, well, I shouldn't say that. There are elephants in India. A lot of the rainforest doesn't have big, large animals because it's hard for them to get through because it can be dense, and there's very little stuff growing on the forest floor. So you get birds that live in the trees, you get things like monkeys and all sorts of stuff. There's some really cool animals like some tree frogs and things like that that have really a lot of poison in them, vipers and snakes. And then you get things like sloths. Lots of sloths in the rainforest. All right, a couple more. Permanent ice. Permanent ice is very easy to locate. Antarctica and the center of Greenland. Those are the only places where it's permanently ice. Now, the climatographs for permanent ice is a little bit difficult because in the southern hemisphere, the temperature, you notice how all the other climatographs have gone up. This one goes down because their seasons are opposite. I say seasons, they don't necessarily get seasons at the South Pole. You get winter and summer, I guess. But temperature very cold, obviously below zero, else it wouldn't be permanently icy. And the rainfall extremely low. We're back into kind of like the tundra almost, where you're only getting a couple millimeters of rain. Now there's some spots some parts in Antarctica that are considered deserts because they don't get enough rainfall to classify them as anything else. So when we talk about the desert, there's two types of desert. You have the hot desert and cold deserts. Desert's definition is kind of just a lack of rain. Permanent ice, again, not the North Pole because that's just an ice cap. It can melt and then it's no longer there, but Antarctica is an actual landmass, as is Greenland. Less than 50 centimeters, most falling is snow. This should say as low as minus 89, right by my head here. Instead it says 89. So minus 89 degrees. Average temperature in the winter is about minus 30. And minus 9 to minus 30 in the summer. Minus 3, minus 14. Always cold. Very strong winds, little soil, little fresh water because everything's frozen. It's always cold. It's amazing that we think of permanent ice. The name is kind of a bit deceptive because you think permanent ice, it's just everything's covered in ice, but that's not necessarily the case. Permanent ice just means that any moisture that's there is frozen. But there is rock that is exposed, and on that rock you can get plants to grow. There are some flowering plants that live in Antarctica as well as Greenland, and lots of mosses and lichens that grow right on rocks because they get their nutrients right from the rock itself. They're good at surviving drought. That's kind of what makes lichens and mosses unique. 2 flowering plants in Antarctica, 100 in the Arctic, has a very brief growing season. There are lots of animals that live in the permanent ice, but the majority of them will get their nutrients from the water. So, I mean, like a polar bear, it goes from like ice floe to ice floe, trying to find seals and things like that. They get kind of trapped. And then if you're like a penguin, penguins dive into the water to find fish. So because there's not a lot of food on the land, the animals that live in the permanent ice will often get their nutrients and substance from the oceans. Animal adaptations. Polar bears, walruses, seals, Arctic foxes, some insects. Antarctica has mainly penguins and marine mammals, such as leopard seals. Penguins have layers of fat, good structural adaptation. Tightly packed feathers helps them keep their heat in. You have things like polar bears. Polar bears have hollow fur fibers that allow them to trap body heat. Walruses, thick fat layers. And walruses don't have an external ear like you and I, which reduces heat loss. So there you go. Those are some of the animal adaptations for permanent ice. I think all we have left is desert. Yuma, Arizona. Desert is a desert because it doesn't get a lot of rainfall. That's just the definition of a desert. Generally less than about 10 millimeters a month. You can see in the summer, late summer, you end up with a couple months that get a little bit extra moisture, but you can have months where it doesn't rain literally for an entire month. Temperature's always quite warm, 15 up to about 35, 40 degrees. Obviously the warmest biome. And the location. We have this biome goes down through the southern United States, down through South America. Much of Africa and the Middle East is desert, as well as kind of the interior of Australia. So we have the Sahara Desert and all the deserts across the African continent. So deserts are found on every continent. Kalahari and Sahara of Africa, Simpson of Australia, and the Atacama of South America. Cold deserts are found in dry regions in the interior of continents. So if you get out of the tropics, then you get into these cold deserts. and they usually occur at very high altitudes. So Patagonia of Argentina, Gobi Desert of Central Asia, they're cold deserts because they receive very little rainfall, generally have a high elevation, and that makes them quite unique because the air is less dense, so it's cold, but they receive very little rainfall, so it's a desert. Hot deserts rainfall is less than 25 centimeters a year. So when we were talking about a tropical rainforest, we were talking about 2.5 meters, which is more than I am tall of rainfall, whereas a desert, we're talking about a ruler's worth of rainfall in a year. So about 1/10 of the amount of rainfall as a rainforest. One of the interesting thing about deserts is they get very, very hot during the day, up into the 40 degrees Celsius range, and at night they can get very cold. They can even drop below 0. Hot deserts, very little rainfall. There's a lot of rain in a very short period of time. Soil's very salty because the minerals don't get washed away. Cold deserts, most precipitation falls as snow, but often rain in the spring. Very little erosion. There's your deserts. Plant adaptations. There's lots of animals and plants that actually live in deserts. You have cacti, which have a really cool way of photosynthesizing sunlight, and they use half as much water as regular photosynthesis. It's a really amazing physiological adaptation that cactus have. They often produce plants. The plants often produce chemicals that make them, taste bad to predators, so they don't get eaten. And they have really thick, waxy shells to prevent water loss on the hot days. Many of the animals that live in the desert are nocturnal, so they only go out at night. They have thick skin, scales, lots of amphibians and reptiles because of the cold-bloodedness. They can go out in the sun and warm up. Cold desert, fan-throat lizards, small mammals, foxes and coyotes, rabbits, pocket mice burrow to escape the cold. So a lot of animals in the desert will burrow just like grasslands to escape the hot temperatures, and then they'll just come out at night. So that is your desert. There you go. Again, you don't have to memorize specific facts about all of the biomes. If you're able to compare them, compare relative things like the rainfall and temperature for each of the biomes, you'll be fine. If you know that a grassland is a grassland because it has a pretty sort of consistent temperature, rainfall a little bit more than a desert, and that'll be good. That's kind of the idea of being able to identify the different biomes. So that is it for that section. I'm going to jump back into the course, and I just want to talk about the next assignment, the Create a Creature. So today is Thursday. We don't have class on Monday. We'll have class on Tuesday, and then we'll have class again on Thursday. So I'd like you to complete this assignment for next Thursday. And the assignment is here. Please download the following file and complete it. I went through this briefly last day. Now that we've talked about all the biomes, we'll look at it again, and if you have any questions, you can ask. So you need to pick a biome. One of the 8, whatever one you like, whatever one you maybe think is going to be the easiest, you should be able to figure out something for all of them. You're going to pick a plant, and what adaptation does that plant have? If you were talking permanent ice, you could talk about a flowering plant. It grows very close to the ground. That is a behavioral adaptation. Why is that important? Because it grows close to the ground, it can absorb the heat from the ground. If it grew very tall, it would freeze and the wind would blow it over and it would die. So first example, flowering plant in Antarctica, and the adaptation is growing close to the ground. Type of adaptation. That is, I guess you could argue it would be structural or behavioral. You could argue either one. And description. By growing close to the ground, it allows it to stay warm and absorb heat. Okay, there's one plant done. Pick another plant. Lichen or moss. Structural or physical adaptation. Again, lichen We'll go structural. It's very dark in color. That's a structural adaptation. How does that help it survive? It absorbs large amounts of light because it is dark in color. There you go, 2 adaptations. Next, I need to come up with 2 animals and fill them in. So I could talk about something like a penguin. A penguin has, a thick layer of fat. That's a structural adaptation, keeps it warm in the winter. I could talk about a penguin again, or like an Arctic fox having very short legs. Why is that important? Short legs help it to retain its body heat. So there you go. Filled in the first page, 2 plants, 2 animals, described the adaptation, and described how it helped it survive. So I'm going to pick 3 of the things I just described on the front page, and then I'm going to add to an additional 2 that can be completely made up. It can be ability to breathe fire. It can be the ability to fly, maybe it's like a plant that can fly. It doesn't matter. It can be anything you want. You just need to describe the type of adaptation. So if you had the ability to breathe fire, that would be a physiological adaptation. If I live in the permanent ice, if I can make fire, I can stay warm. That helps me survive. Perfect. So you're going to either draw a picture and label the 5 adaptations, describe what type of adaptation it is and how it helps it survive, or you can just write a paragraph if you're not big into art. I am not big into art, but I would probably draw because I don't like writing very much. The picture doesn't need to be good. As long as I can identify the things you're trying to describe, that's perfect. That's all I need. I don't need a Picasso. I guess Picasso is probably not a good example. I don't need a Michelangelo portrait of your animal. As long as I can identify what's there, that's all I need. It gives you some tips on what to remember. 5 adaptations. Draw your creature, describe it, explain the adaptation, explain how it helps it survive. Does anybody have any questions about this assignment? All right, that is that. That is it for today. I have nothing else for you. Does anybody have any questions just in general, not specific to the assignment? All right, I am going to leave you guys there, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. Again, badminton tomorrow if you want to come out to that. No experience required. Just show up. And I will see you guys in class on Tuesday if I don't see you tomorrow at badminton. So have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon.